Hello, happy to be here. Very excited to be on the show. What's the show called, by the way? That sounds excellent. Yeah, yeah. Yes. A lot of no problems, a lot of archives to pour over. I'm just happy we finally eclipsed Joe Rogan and are now the most popular podcast in the world. That's excellent and exciting. So, I believe you have me here because we're just going to talk about the War of 1812, but not as many people talk about it. We're going to talk about something else. Oh, most definitely. Uh, they're absolutely critical to the teaching and understanding of history. So much so that I'm going to look and read them now off my sheet that I have. So the ones we're going to be focusing mainly on in this podcast is historical significance, continuity and change, and historical perspective. The War of 1812 is obviously a crazy and important, significant event in the development of Canada, the structuring of North America, and in Indigenous histories. So the significance of these events and their contribution will be analyzed thoroughly. Continuity and change and historical perspective are kind of a tandem on this podcast, as one of the key areas we're going to be focusing on is the discourses and histories where, depending on who they were told by and how they affect the remembrance of such a significant event. So all our concepts that we're going to kind of work on and discuss in this podcast all kind of relate to one another in how the war itself is remembered by multiple people and how that affects and frames the understanding of this important history of Canada. I would love nothing more, actually. So the War of 1812, in a short version, was fought between the United States of America, which was formerly British colonies. I believe they had separated only 40 years prior, roughly, and they were trying to expand northward into the British colonies that would later become the Dominion of Canada and Canada as we know today. And the war was basically fought between the United States and their allies at the time, and the British Empire and the Indigenous people that occupied northern Canada, or I guess not northern Canada, just Canada. Uh, it lasted a few years, and the British were ultimately victorious, with famously burning down the White House and in the final throes of the war. And this conflict also kind of fits into the wider narrative of the Napoleonic Wars and a very tumultuous time period indeed in Europe and across the world. Exactly. Mhm. Most definitely. Which is unfortunately indicative of a wider history of betrayal amongst Indigenous people in this country. I'm happy to contribute. Hmm. I would definitely agree, and that actually brings me to a interesting point here of two specific battle contributions that the Indigenous Salt warriors ended up being a critical difference in victory for the British over the Americans. The first one I'll talk about is the Battle of Queenston Heights, the famous battle where General Brock led a charge. But what people don't realize is that there's also around 300 Six Nation warriors led by Mohawk War Chief John Norton and John Bryant. I'm not going to try to pronounce their names out of respect because they're very challenging. But those are just the names that are here. But they actually have their own Indigenous names as well as everyone does. Um, but it was their brilliant tactical decisions in attacking from unexpected sides that, as you mentioned, that ended up winning the day, helping win the day. And more specifically, in terms of guerrilla warfare, the Battle of Beaver Dams, where in the Niagara region, the Indigenous soldiers ambushed Americans who were trying to sneak up behind British positions, and led the same two men actually, amongst others, actually led a successful ambush where they were able to defeat the Americans and stop the potential surprise attack that was coming their way. So again, like huge contributions that without them making those decisions could have definitely changed the war in the Canada we live in today. Mm-hmm. Well, it's definitely problematic because it further kind of asserts this idea of European superiority that is prevalent and a Western central historical practice. And you have to remember too that these people, these indigenous warriors, are fighting to defend their homes as well, and they were promised considerably, considerable rewards for doing so by the British, but they were also inherently just defending their home, and they were also losers in this conflict because they didn't actually gain much. All they lost, they lost leverage actually by defeating the Americans in a funny enough, well, not funny, but in a twist of fate necessarily. And it's tragic, and things are changing, and I believe that it is important to kind of you know explain these contributions because they fought and died for the same land that we inhabit today. So they defended the land that the British took from them essentially. So it is important to to make sure that the history is cognizant of all the participants in a fair way. And I believe you actually did some research on Tecumseh and how his portrayal as the noble Indian is also problematic for the understanding of this history. Hmm. Hmm. And I like what you said about the war chief thing, and that's something that I've also thought about, is that it keeps Indigenous people militant in memory, as opposed to being just average people in their own right who were doing what needed to be done. It keeps them in this militant mindset of they were allies for the war, and now the war is over, they go away. You know what I mean? And I think that's indicative of the British practice and how they behaved afterwards as well. It was strictly a wartime measure. And I think by keeping this war chief, like noble ally image, it perpetuates that idea that they were there for the war and the war only, which is not true. They are here and they've been here forever. So. Mhm. Oh, I think Canadian identity, in the terms of stemming from the War of 1812, I think is more specifically. I mean, we're running out of time here, so I'll try to get through it quickly. Um, I think it's the first time Canada was attacked, even though Canada didn't actually exist. It was as a unified force. It defended itself to a certain degree. The colonies defended themselves. So I think the fact that Indigenous voices aren't and Indigenous stories aren't adequately told in this identity and this beginning of a nation, one could say, it's definitely problematic because it's indicative of a lifetime of ignorance, really, to what they did. And throughout their entirety of European colonization, Indigenous people were helpful, and I think we lose sight of that. And in terms of and by pushing them away and not telling their history, it's easier for us as a Western centric white society to discount them and keep them at arm's reach. But they helped found this nation, and I think that's important in terms of understanding our identity. Thanks for having me, Erin. Take care, everyone.